All right, let's get started with Substance Painter. Substance Painter is an awesome program to apply your materials to your objects in a very realistic way. And I just wanted to point out, if you're watching this on YouTube, go down in the description and you'll see a bunch of time codes. And if you need to go to a specific area, just go ahead and click on that link and it'll bring you right to that spot. Otherwise, what you could do is scrub through on the time bar and it'll kind of tell you where the bookmarks are, so you can kind of like just jump to where you need to, or just you're welcome to watch it in its entirety. So I just kind of wanted to mention that. But let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File, New, and I'm presented with this. And if you're on a different version of Substance, it might be different. But what I'm looking for is I want the template to be PBR Metallic Roughness, and in this case, Alpha Blend. So what this means is it's physically based render, and it's going to be metallic roughness. More about that later. Alpha Blend just means that if we want glass, it'll be ready for glass. Okay, I'm going to go to File, Select, and I'm going to choose, if I go to the desktop here, I'm going to go to the ship. Okay, I have a spaceship ready. I'm going to go ahead and click Open. And document resolution, if you have a good computer, you can have a larger file. If your computer is slow with anything that I'm doing, or that the model that you have, I recommend going to a smaller file size. I usually like to do either 2048 or 4096. I'll go ahead and leave it at 4096, and I'm just going to leave all of this other stuff unchecked. Now I'll go ahead and click OK. And now you can see here's the spaceship. It comes in, and I can press Alt, left mouse click does this, Alt and middle mouse does this, and Alt and right mouse does this. I can also say that Alt and middle mouse does this, and Alt and right mouse kind of zooms in. So what I'm looking at here is, obviously this is the 3D view, and this is the 2D view. If I switch this, I can switch to 3D only, 2D only, or 3D and 2D. I think for now I'm going to leave it at 2D and 3D. Now, over here, your menus might look different than mine. I'm just going to go close out of all the menus here. And I can even close out of this one, so your assets might be up here. If so, just go ahead and click an X, and you'll see that we'll get all of them docked over here. And now if I hover over these, I can see here's my texture set list, my texture set settings, my layers, paint properties, display settings, shader settings, assets, history, and log. Okay, so the assets, okay, if I click on that, this pops up. And if I click on this, if I hover over, it's going to kind of give me a preview of where it would dock. So I want to have it down here. I like to have my materials down here. I'm also going to click on, let's see, paint properties. That's this one here. So if I click on that, once again, this pops out. I'm going to hover over to the side, and I want it to dock over here. I also want layers. So I'm going to click on layers, and once again, this pops out, and I'm going to pop this right up here. Now I can go to right between these and click, and I can kind of drag that up and make that like that. Now, just another thing, let's say if I go to shader settings, and if I wanted that to be next to layers, I could drag it, and if I drop it right in the same area, you can see that now there's a tab here that I can kind of like use this same space and share the space between these two. I don't want shader settings right now, so I'm just going to click an X and get rid of that. And now I just have my layers. So that's just kind of a quick overview of kind of setting up the interface. Feel free to customize it however you want. However, if you're following along for the first time, I would recommend to keep it exactly like mine. And once you get comfortable, then you can kind of change it up as you get going, okay, as you get more comfortable with it. But let's take a look at this first layer. So this is an empty layer, and the checkerboard indicates that there's nothing there. There's no white paint, there's nothing. And down here, I can see that this is the brush settings, and if I click on this, you can see that it takes me to the alpha settings, takes me to the stencil, and takes me to the materials. So I can also scroll up and down, and you can see that it kind of goes through these bookmarks. There it is. And we're going to be spending most of our time on the material bookmark. So I'm going to just kind of click on that last one or just kind of scroll down so I see all of these. Now, you'll notice that it says metal and rough. And remember when we started, it said metallic roughness. That's why metal and roughness is showing up here. If I had it set to something like specular glossiness and then hit new, it would say specular and glossiness. Now, why is that important? Well, it depends what type of program that you're going to end up with. And Maya likes the metal roughness. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this back to PBR metal roughness. Not that it matters that I'm changing it now, but that's why we have these. So color, that's going to be obviously responsible for the color of the object. Height is going to be when we do kind of an illusion map or illusion of a normal map to make paneling and bolts and rivets and that kind of thing. Roughness is how shiny or dull it is. Metal obviously is how metallic it is, or how does it look like metal. Normal map is basically the illusion of depth. And then we have the opacity, which is going to be is it transparent or not. And then emissive, which is there like lights on it. Okay, so we'll kind of get through and take a look at these. The first thing that I want to talk about is height. So I'm going to just turn off all of these. And notice when I turn them off, they become dark. And I can see that I only have height available. And I'm going to turn on normal map. Okay, so it produces a normal map. I don't even know if I need normal map, to be honest, but I'll just leave that on. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to paint. And you'll notice that when I put my paintbrush on the model, I can see that it kind of feels like it stays on the model. Okay, that's kind of cool. And if I want to change the size of the brush, I can hold down Control and right mouse click. And now I'm dragging my mouse left and right. Okay, and if I hold down Control and if I drag my mouse up and down, that's going to change the feathering of the brush. Okay, so if I want to see a preview of that, if I look over here, if I hold down right mouse click, you can see it's a hard edge and bring it down. I'm holding down Control, and then if I go to left and right, you can see there. And even if I go like that, I can paint in here and kind of see a preview of my brush. Okay, so now if I make a small brush like that, I want to paint some paneling in here. So if I bring this to the left of the center on height, now if I click and drag, it's going to produce a line that looks like it's cutting into the model. Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. However, that's not very straight, right? So if I click on the model, as opposed to out here, I want to make sure that I start on the model and then hold down Shift and click right to here. Now I can see that that's nice and straight. Okay, and maybe I do another one. Okay, and if it doesn't hit the edge all the way, that means that you probably weren't on the model to begin with. There we go. And I'll do one more. Plus the wing is rounded, so it's kind of weird sometimes. Okay, and then I'm going to do these. Okay, great. Now I've got that. And I can see that it looks like it's sticking down. And it might look like it's sticking up. It's kind of an illusion. But if I hold down Shift and right mouse click and drag my mouse to the left and right, you can see that I can rotate the lighting. Okay, and I can kind of really tell what's going on there. So if I want stuff to stick up, I can go like this. I could just drag it to the right of center, and now I can have some bolts sticking up. So now if I go like this, you can see that I get those bolts and it looks like they're sticking up. Okay, so pretty cool. Nice. Now if I rotate, I can see, yeah, that looks three-dimensional. Okay, but remember we also have this 2D view. So I could do the same thing over here. So I could bring this back to the left of center, and now I can kind of make my paneling on here. On the 2D version, if it's easier for me to draw, you'll notice that when I'm drawing, it doesn't matter. It's going on to the 3D version as well. All right, and then I could do right of center, and I could do the bolts. Okay, great. Now you might be saying, well, Dave, I want that to be perfect, okay? It's not perfectly symmetrical. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that again, but this time I'm going to make it symmetrical. So let's say if I didn't want this, I could hide the layer, or I could just delete it by hitting this trash can. And now I'm going to do this. I'm going to go and make a new layer. So I'm going to click on this paintbrush to make a new layer. And that's an empty layer. And I'm going to start by making the panels, and I'm going to go left of center here. Now I'm going to click on this icon here, and this is going to add symmetry. And you can see that there's now a line down the center. So now if I click and drag, it's going to produce a line that's symmetrical on the other side. So even if I'm not seeing the other side, I still have symmetry on. I know that it's going to be working. And then I'm going to go here and here. And I can see that it did it on both sides. Now if I go to right of center, now I'm going to, for my bolts, and this time I'm going to paint here. I'm going to leave symmetry on, and I'm going to paint on the 2D view. So this is really cool. I can paint on the 2D view, and it's still working. My symmetry is still working. So once again, a super cool program. I can see that I can get that paneling on there, and I can get whatever I want with that detail. So just kind of making some straight lines and kind of some cool things there. But let's see what else we can do with this. So right now, if I go up here, and if I click on alphas, so let's see, I think this one is our alphas icon. And you can see that there's a lot of different alphas. And I'm just going to go to one that looks like a screw or something, like this cross forbidden. Okay, and I want this to stick up, and I want this to be up here. And if I click on it, you can see that, whoop, maybe I want it to be the other way. There we go. Actually, it was an illusion. I got to trust this. Okay, so that is high. There, now it is truly sticking up. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I want there to be like a lot of bolts evenly spaced right here for whatever reason. Okay, I'm just hitting Control Z to get rid of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll up in this area, and I'm going to go to spacing. And I'm going to put my spacing, I could just go like that, or I could just type in 200. And it kind of gives you a preview here, and you can see that I can click and it can kind of show me what's going on there. But if I click right here, hold down Shift, you can see that now it's evenly spaced. Okay, and maybe I turn off symmetry and just do one here and one here as well. Okay, now I'll put that spacing back down. I think it was kind of at default like 20 or something. And now I could just kind of put in some extra ones if I want to, if it feels like some are missing. But at least I have the kind of the majority of them perfectly spaced. Okay, excellent. Now, now I want to put some vents in the back here. So I could kind of look through all of my alphas here. I could even import alphas from Photoshop or any other program that would allow me to make a black and white image, even downloading them from the web. Or I could use what's here, and I could use the search feature on top, and I'm going to type in vent. And you can see here, here's a vent. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to double click. And now I can see that my icon is the vent. So if I Control right click, it's going to be like this. And if I Control left click, it's going to spin it. And I want to make sure that I'm Control left click and I drag my mouse up and down. Okay, if I drag it left and right, it'll actually change the flow at the top there. So you got to be kind of careful with that. So I want to do Control left mouse click and drag up and down. So now maybe I want to turn symmetry back on, and I'm going to go right here. I'm going to go back down here, and I'm going to say out is good. There we go. Excellent. I've got my vents in right there. Okay. And now let's say we want some bolts. I'm just going to go to a normal brush. So I'm going to go back to my brush. And I just want a simple hard brush, okay? And I'm gonna control drag. And what I want this time is I want a bunch of bolts or something kind of going around here, but I want them evenly spaced, okay? So what I can do is I can go to this and I can choose Radial Symmetry, okay? And Radial Symmetry, I can see here, I want it to span all the way 360 degrees. And I want there to be quite a few of them. So I want there to be, well, let's say 12. That's good. Now, if I click on here, oh, I'm going to undo that. I can see right here that I can kind of get that perfect. And I can click on here, and there it is. So now I've got that radial symmetry. And let's say if you wanted that radial symmetry to be on the top, or maybe on the bottom of it, or even over here. Well, what we can do is if I click on this arrow, I could now move this radial symmetry. And you can see that red circle. I can move it, so now it's right there. And now you can see that everything will be around that. Okay, but what if I wanted it at the top here? Well, what I could do is I can go here and I could say mirror Y. And now you can see that my radial symmetry is on the top. And I can get this circle to be right in the center if I aligned it right. And then I can kind of come here and I could kind of do some radial symmetry stuff. And I could probably go in here and I could say X, I want to be perfectly 0, and that's going to center it. And Z, maybe I could have that perfectly 0. And now that's totally centered on the spaceship, but I feel like I'm going to kind of eyeball it here and maybe do something like this. And what's cool is if I move this, you can see I could kind of get a cool effect. Okay, I don't know. You know what, you can do whatever you want, but and then maybe I want to be really elaborate and kind of go out here and just kind of maybe make that a little bit smaller, or maybe do one in here. There we go. That's kind of cool. But really kind of decorate your object however you want. Make it feel like it's actually a real kind of working object. And you know, I could put more vents down here and I could keep doing other things, but I'm just going to go ahead and export this now. And we're going to kind of come back to this later. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go to File, Export Textures. And when I do this, I'm going to say, I want to export to, let's say my desktop. So let me see. And I'm going to call this, so select folder. There it is, my desktop. PBR Metallic Roughness. I'll leave that alone, and I'm going to click on this, and I can see that it's going to export all of these. It's going to export my base color, my height, my roughness, my metal, my normal, opacity, height. Actually, it looks like it's not sending out opacity, but really on this one, the only thing that I want is my normal map. So I'm going to uncheck all of these. Even though we used height to actually kind of like drive the normal, but really what we want is a normal map. So I'm going to select just normal map. Once again, from the global settings, I click down here. Yours probably would say something else right here, whatever your default material was. But then you can check which map that you want. And the only thing on the global settings that you have to make sure of is that you're saving it into the correct location. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit export, and it exported that map. So if I want to see that map, I can go here and here it is. So that's the normal map. That's what it looks like. It looks kind of weird, but hey, that's okay. We'll come back to that later. So now, what can we do with this object? Well, let's take a look here. I'm going to go and add a material to this. So if I go to materials, I can see here's a list of materials. And if I take a material, let's say this plastic glossy, and drag and drop it onto this, now the whole thing is this glossy blue. Okay, if I drag this red one, and it's now this material. Okay, and if I change my mind, I can go over here and I can delete my materials. Could I paint on there? Absolutely. But let's just talk about materials right now. So if I want to work with materials, I'm most likely going to want to work with multiple materials. For example, and I'm going to just turn off this symmetry, I might want this part to be glass. I might want this part to be like gold. I might want this part to be metal, etc. So how do I go about kind of like doing that? Because if I put one of these on there, that could be, it kind of takes up the whole thing. So how do I mask it off? Well, let's take a look at that. So this is that same ship, and it's in a program called Maya. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep this before bringing it into Substance Painter. I'm going to prep it in here. And the way that I'm going to prep it is I'm going to create a color ID. So I'm going to select all the things that would have a different material and give that a different color ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm in the modeling menu set. I'm going to go to mesh display, and I'm going to go to vertex colors. And where it says apply color, I'm going to click on the option. Now I'm going to go ahead and select what I want. So I'm going to just select any color and now hit apply color. Now realize that this is not apply a different material. This is what's called vertex color. So I think of it as a sub material. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this window here, and I'm going to grow the selection. So I just clicked on one face, shift double clicked on its neighbor, and then hit shift period or shift greater than to grow the selection. And now I'm going to go to mesh display, vertex color, and I'm going to go and apply a different color. Apply. It doesn't matter what color as long as it's different. Okay, great. Now I'm going to go to this area. I'm going to shift double click, and then I'm going to go ahead and grow that selection. Okay, and obviously it grabs some stuff that I didn't want, so I'm going to be a little bit more mindful about how I'm doing this. I'm just going to maybe shift double click like that, maybe grow this selection a little bit. There, that's probably pretty good. Maybe I want to get some more in here. Whoop. There we go, and then I'll go ahead and make this a different color. Okay, great. And it looks like maybe I got some extra that I didn't want. So if I want it to be this exact kind of red on that, I'm going to go like this. I'm going to select a vertex on the red area and say select vertex color. Now I grab that exact red, and now I'm going to go like this and say apply. What that's going to do is it's going to now make that the exact same color. Okay, great. Now I'm going to to save some time, I'm going to turn on symmetry. I'm going to say object X, and now what I select on one side should select on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and, oh, looks like I accidentally did that there. That's all right. I'm going to select these, grow the selection. Okay, bring that back. And I'm going to just have this a different color. You can see that, okay, that looks good. Maybe I'll select these. If I go to face, double click, and then make this a different color yet. Once again, that it's a different color than everything else. And what I'm saying is that, okay, this will be metal. This will be a different type of metal or any material. And this will be a different material than all the rest, okay? And that's how I have it divided now. And if we wanted more specific, then we would have to, we could do that later. Maybe I want this. Usually I like to avoid green because it's kind of tough to see what I have selected. I'm just going to kind of do another band of something here and make that. There we go. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So let's say if I like this. So now what I would do, and this would really be the first step. The reason that I didn't start with it is kind of like, hey, welcome to Substance, let's start in Maya. It's kind of weird, okay? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this whole ship, and I'm going to go File, Export Selection. And now I'm going to save this on the desktop, and I'm going to save it as an FBX. And I'm going to call this ship, I'm going to call this Vertex Color FBX, okay, and export selection. Now in Substance Painter, remember we did save the normal map, so I can bring that back, but I'm going to go ahead and bring this all back in. So I'm going to go to my texture set settings, and I'm going to go ahead and, well actually hold on, before I do that, I'm going to go to File, New. And in here, I'm going to just re-import the ship. So I'm going to go to File, Select. And here I'm going to bring in the ship with a vertex color that I just assigned. And I'm going to click Open. Okay, I'm going to say Document Resolution 4096 and leave everything like that and click OK. I'm going to hit Discard. Now, we're kind of back to where we started. This is the ship. It looks like nothing's different, right? And right now, there is nothing different. But if I wanted to import my normal map, I could, and I'll do that later. But right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my texture set settings. And in my texture set settings, I'm going to go ahead and bake the maps. And this is what I would say is arguably the most important thing that we can do. So I'm just going to kind of open this up and go down here to Bake Mesh Maps. And when I click on Bake Mesh Maps, I'm going to put my output size to 4096. And here are all the things that it's going to bake. And we'll get into that in a second. But I'm going to call your attention to ID, because that's what we did the vertex colors for, and that'll make more sense in a second. But if I click on ID, I can see my color source is set to material. I'm going to switch this to vertex color. Basically what that's telling Substance is that this ship has vertex colors assigned to it, and they're important. So we want to make sure that it has those. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit Bake Selected Textures. And what it's going to do is it's going to analyze this model, and it's going through and it's calculating all of these things. And depending on your computer, it could take, obviously more or less time. And I'll just let this think. And when it's done, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. The only thing that visually it looked like it did is it looks like it populated these slots right here. Okay, well, what is all of this stuff? I'm going to go ahead and close the texture set settings, and I'm going to look at what those maps are. And if I click here, and if I scroll down, I can see here's the mesh maps. Here's what's called the normal map. Here's the world space normal. And this looks kind of weird, but what it did was it basically put a color at the bottom of the model versus the top of the model. So it's saying where, hey, there's green light, that's the top of the model, and where there's red light, that's the bottom of the model. That might sound kind of weird now, but it'll make more sense in a second. If I go to ID, this is the ID map that we made in Maya. Okay, so it did find that. If I go to ambient occlusion, you can see what it did is it put black where there's a crevice, or where the geometry meets and comes close to another piece of geometry. If I go to curvature, what curvature did is it looks like it found an edge of the model and made it white. So the curvature understands where the edges of the model are. If I go to position, okay, position looks like it understands the left and right side of the model. And if I go to thickness, thickness is how thick it is, so it understands that this part is thicker than this part. If you picture that, we could say that, let's say this is 1 foot, and this would only be a couple inches thick, okay? And maybe an inch thick at the end, depending on how big the ship is, obviously. I guess that would be pretty small. I mean, maybe if it was a toy or something. But, it's determining the thickness. Now, if I go back to material, you'll be saying, well, wait a minute. Why is any of that important? We don't even see it. And that's why it's baked in there. That's what it means, is that it's baked, it's embedded. And if we need to use that information, we can use it strategically to our advantage. For example, let me go ahead and go back to this blue glossy material. Now, before I just dragged it on and it went over the whole thing. I'm going to hit Control Z. Now, if I hold down Control while dragging, you can see that I can assign it to a particular color ID. So now if I drop it here, it's just going to go to that area. Okay? And if I select another one, let's say this one, Cobalt Pure, I can drop that onto this. And then I could grab brass and I could put it here. Gold Pure right here. And who knows, this iron right here. And something else here, I don't know. But we can see that we can very, very quickly just assign materials to isolated locations. And if we look at what's happening here, I can see that these are the materials and these are the masks that are automatically generated via the Vertex color IDs. So, but we're just kind of getting started here. If I go to this one over here, the smart materials, there's one called dirt. Now, if I want to apply dirt to this object, it's going to be weird if I apply it just to the gray metal, because that wouldn't look very natural. I want it to go over everything. So if I want to apply it to everything, I'm not going to hold down Control. I'm simply going to drag and drop. And now it's going to apply to the whole thing. So now it doesn't matter what material it is, it applied it to everything. And you can see that the dirt is literally over everything. And just to kind of see how this works, all of these had a mask automatically assigned because we did the color ID, but the dirt does not have a mask because I just dropped it on. But I could create a mask for the dirt if I want to by going over here and going to add a white mask. Okay, if I add a white mask, it's going to be completely shown. Okay, if I add a black mask, it's going to be completely invisible. So I'm going to add a white mask because I want most of the dirt, or all the dirt in this case, to be visible. And if I want to erase the dirt on the mask, I can use my grayscale or white right here. So I'm going to go to my black, and that's going to erase the dirt. So now if I come in here, it's as if I'm taking a rag and I'm kind of like polishing this and cleaning the dirt right off. And I'm painting directly on the mask right here, and you can kind of see what I'm doing there. So now I can kind of clean out the ship and just kind of do whatever I need to do. Okay. If I change my mind, I wanted to bring that dirt back, I could bring it back to white. And now I can kind of paint it back in, and now it's bringing that dirt back. Okay, so pretty cool. But now let's take a look at some other things here. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete all of my layers here. So I'm just going to click on this and delete all this. Okay, great. Now I'm going to create a material. So if I go back to my regular materials, so this first one is my materials, and the next one's my smart materials. So I'm going to just start with the regular materials. And what I want to do is I'm going to put a base of steel. Okay, so if I go here, if I hover over this, steel rough. Okay, great. I'm going to drag and drop that on here. That looks pretty good. And notice I just dropped it over everything. That's okay. I'm going to just leave it on this just to demonstrate kind of a point of how the smart materials are constructed. Now what I want to do is I want to, let's say, add some rust to this. Well, I can drop rust over the whole thing, and you can see that, wow, the whole thing is rusty. But it probably doesn't make sense that the whole thing is rusty. Maybe I just want certain parts of the ship to be rusty. So what I can do is I can go to my smart masks right here, this third button, and now I can see a preview of what these do. So I could think about where would the object rust? And you can see here's one that's called surface rust. Here's another one called rust. Here's another one called rust drips, rust ground. Here's one called dirt cavities. Okay, so let's say if I grabbed one, maybe this dirt occlusion, if I dragged this mask onto rust fine, now I can see that it looks like it rusted. It's rusting. Here, if I turn rust off, I can see that there's no rust. Here's rust. But where is the rust accumulating? It's accumulating in all these kind of hard to reach areas. Okay, so if you kind of picture, like, let's say if, I don't know, if this ship got wet, but then we wiped it off and we weren't able to dry in these, dry off these areas that are hard to reach, perhaps it would cause it to rust. So now you might be asking yourself, wait a minute, how did the rust mask know where those tight areas are? It feels like it actually knows our model. And remember, it does know our model because when we went to bake the maps, what did it do? It found things like, it found where the crevices are located. It found where the edges are. So because it knows all of that stuff, certain masks down here ask for the edge of the object. Some ask for the crevices of the object. Some asks for the rounded parts of it. And it doesn't really matter. It's all kind of happening behind the scenes, but I think it's really cool to know that that is actually what's happening. So let's say if I added paint on here. Well, I could go to back to my regular materials, and if I added paint, I could go to something like, let's see here, maybe this, let's see. Well, actually, maybe I want to make paint myself. So what I could do, instead of like relying on one of these, I'm going to click on this fill layer, okay? And if I click on the fill layer, it's going to flood the entire object with that color. And if I come down here, I can go to color and I could change the color. So let's say if I want red paint, okay? Now I could say I don't want there to be any height, so I could turn height off. For roughness, that is going to be how shiny or matte the object is. So you can see that if I bring it all the way over here, it almost looks like it's like super wet paint. If I bring it here, it's kind of shiny. I kind of like the kind of shiny like that, maybe. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Let's say I like that. Okay. But it's not, I don't know, it's not very realistic, the fact that the red paint is perfectly covered the object. It would most likely eventually start to chip. And where would it most likely chip? Probably at the edges of the object. Okay, so where there's a hard crease. So what I'm going to do is if I go to my smart masks again, I'm going to find something that is chipping on the edge. So let me see here. If I go to, here's edges. Here's edges, strong, scratched. Okay, so yeah, this is cool. Edges, strong, scratched. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that onto my object. And now I can see that I have kind of the inverse effect. It's only, it's opposite of what I want. So what I could do is I could go to, I could actually click on curvature here. And then there's a global invert button that I could just click on and invert it real quick. Okay, great. So now I can see that the paint is now chipping on the edges. And, okay, great. And it's revealing the steel underneath. Now, if I wanted there to be more scratches, if I pictured just me kind of like taking my hand and kind of scraping this paint off, I can do that as well. The way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to click on this mask, and I'm going to go to the magic wand, and I'm going to add a paint layer. This is going to be a non-destructive way to alter this mask. So instead of me painting on this mask, I could just go to this paint layer, and now I could go back to my brushes, and I could select a brush. So maybe like, it doesn't really matter, I'll just go dirt 1. And now, if I go to black, I can kind of go in here and I can kind of scrape this away, and you can see that I'm scraping the paint away on the mask to reveal the steel underneath. Okay, so that's pretty cool. And, you know, maybe I want, yeah, I could play with this to find a cool, you know, really cool brush. But I just don't want the edges to be perfectly clean, so I think that's kind of cool. And now I'm kind of doing some manual wear and tear. So I'm going to let Substance Painter do the heavy lifting and find where it thinks it mathematically should do it. But then I'm going to go kind of put my human touch in and kind of figure that out like that. Now, what if I change my mind? Well, it's cool I didn't ruin my original mask. I could hide the eyeball of this paint layer, and now that's gone. Okay, so you can see I can non-destructively add stuff to the mask, just like that. Okay, and now I'm not seeing the rust because the order of this stuff matters. I'm going to put the rust above the paint, and now I can see that there's rust. Okay, and maybe it doesn't make sense that there would be rust on the paint, but I think it's just to illustrate this point. So I've got rust, I've got paint, I've got steel. And to keep this organized, maybe I want to create a folder. So if I create a folder, now I could grab the rust and I can drag it into that folder. And I can add the paint, drag it in there, and the steel. And sometimes this will change the order. So I'm just going to change it again, like that. Okay, and I can see that that is all nested in that folder. So in this folder, I have rust, which is Substance Painter is telling it where to go into the crevices. I have paint, and Substance Painter is telling it where to go on cracking on the edges. And then I have steel rough, okay, just kind of a base material. So that is us just kind of looking at smart masks and materials. But what about if I thought that was too much work? Okay, well, watch this. I'm going to just hide this layer for a second, and I'm going to go to Smart Materials. And what Smart Materials are basically that done for us. So if I go to, let's see here, this one here, Steel Painted Scraped Dirty. If I drag that onto the ship, okay, take a look at this. It has dirt in the crevices. It has paint scraped at the edges, scraped off, revealing the metal underneath. And if I open up the folder, I can see that it's basically exactly what we just built, okay? But this time they built it for us. So they put a base metal on there, and then they put base or paint with a mask. They put roughness variation, I'll get into that later. They put dirt with a smart mask, so the dirt automatically knows where to go. But here's the interesting thing, is that it's a smart mask. So in other words, it reacts to your model. And it'll only react to your model if you bake the maps prior. So once again, we have to go to this idea here. We have to go into the bake mesh maps, and we have to make sure that we bake it so Substance Painter can understand what it's looking at. And if it understands what it's looking at, then it can apply these smart masks in a logical way. And it can do all of that kind of that magic for us. So once again, I feel like we're just kind of scraping the surface here. So I'm just going to delete this and maybe go back to my smart materials. And now I could go like this. I could hold down Control and I could drag that, and now the red only goes where it needs to. And then I could grab another one, maybe this Steel Ruined. I could drag it on here. Okay, that's cool. And now, so I feel like with these, with these smart materials, I feel like we're kind of getting a little bit more interesting than just the regular materials. Okay, and even this glass visor, I'm going to drag that on here. And I can see that that is now clear. And maybe I'll have this right there. And then, let's see, maybe this on here. Okay, very cool. And on the glass visor, if I go to glass visor here, if I open that up, I can see everything. Here's the base. Here's the everything else about it. So I feel like that's just kind of scratching the surface, okay, no pun intended, on Substance Painter, just kind of a look at the materials, looking at how layers work, looking at how some of the properties work and how materials work. So hopefully you found this helpful, and there'll be more Substance Painter videos in the future. So good luck with Substance Painter, and once again, I will see you later.